Hi everyone, and welcome to Joy Church. We are so excited that you've joined us today online. Now, we just got done with a series that had no name, and so we're going into a new series today. And since we didn't name the last one, we had a little bit more room to name this one. And so this new series is called Dare to Hope. Even when life hands you lemons and you're down on your luck, and you're backed into a corner, and you're at the end of your rope, and the chips are down. See the bottom, and the world is against you, and you're in the dark night of the soul. We figured that we probably maybe should just shorten it up a little bit to Dare to Hope. We're talking about hope, and why are we talking about hope? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason is this is a really, really great time in history to feel hopeless. There's a lot of things going on, in case you didn't know that. We're dealing with COVID, which this virus has been all around the world. It's been affecting all of us in some way, and some of us have experienced it physically. Most of us have probably felt it in terms of the ramifications that it has politically. It's a very politically charged idea about what we should do, how we should go about eradicating or surviving or dealing with this virus. A lot of us are dealing with economic ramifications. We're dealing with businesses being closed. Maybe some of your businesses have felt this. Maybe some of the places that you go and do business have been closed, and there are a lot of feelings on both sides of the aisle on that. There's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of political strife. In case you weren't aware, there's a lot of people who have different opinions about how the world should be run. In fact, a lot of statistics and political philosophy is telling us that today, the right and the left, and the kind of two poles of the political spectrum, are more divided. They're farther apart ideologically than they have been at any other time in our nation's history. There's a lot going on. There's wars. There's rumors of wars. In just about every area that you could possibly think, there are a lot of reasons to be hopeless. There is a lot of reason to run out of this thing that we call hope. And oftentimes I think we kind of maybe misname or misappropriate a definition to the word hope, and what ends up happening is we think that it just means good feelings or things are going well or going okay, and that's all there is to it. And there's a lot more to hope. In fact, we wouldn't even need hope if there wasn't darkness, if there wasn't war, if there wasn't questions, if there wasn't hopeless situations. There would be really no need for it. It would just be called normal life. Hope is that thing that exists when it looks like all the chips are down, like we don't have a chance, like things are dark and getting darker. And so we figured that this would be the best time. This would be the most critical juncture to talk about what it looks like to have hope, what it looks like to be a person of hope. And so this series is called Dare to Hope. Now, why dare to hope? Well, the definition for the word dare, it means literally having the courage required for something. Having courage that's required for some situation. This is why when you were younger, you played this game called Truth or Dare, and you'd either have to answer an embarrassing question truly, or you would have to carry out some dare that your friends made you do. You'd have to leave an irreverent present on somebody's windshield, or a flaming bag on somebody's doorstep, or you'd have to doorbell ditch something. You'd have to do something that would stretch you out of your comfort zone. You would have to have courage to do it. You'd have to be brave enough to achieve this dare. So if we think of a dare in that sense, it's something dangerous, it's something scary, it's something that you have to get out of your comfort zone, you have to have courage in order to achieve. This title, Dare to Hope, really starts to mean something. The word hope, the definition of the word hope, is the expectation of something good. It's that you are expecting, you're preparing, you are planning for good things to happen to you in your present and in your future. That's just normal. That's what is to be expected. And why is it daring? Why does it take courage? Well, I think that oftentimes we slowly leak hope. We forget what it feels like to expect something good. It's not normal everyday behavior. What we do is we expect things to be bad. We expect us to lose jobs and lose money and lose security, and our kids to spin out and our marriage relationship to suffer. I mean, without meaning to, we expect it. And so what we want to talk about, and what we really want to hope to instill and to share during this whole series for the next 5 weeks, is that we are going to dare to hope, and we'd invite you to dare to hope. It's something that will change your life, but it is absolutely, completely, 100% up to you. It's a deliberate decision. It's something that you choose to do. It's not something that happens to you on accident. It's not something that you just feel. It's something that you choose to do. And I don't know if you've ever met somebody who is terminally fearful of what we call getting your hopes up. When we talk about the expectation of something good, I happen to know someone who's very close to me. She happens to be my wife. And we often get in this conversation because when something good might happen, she says, I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to get my hopes up. And I always say, why not? Wouldn't it be better to get your hopes up and be really excited about something and it fail to come about, rather than to never hope for anything, to never get your hopes and set your expectations high and really hope and expect that something good happens? With this series, what I'm hoping to do, what I'm trying to do, what I really truly believe that I myself, and probably you need to latch onto, is that it's high time that we get our hopes up, that we really do expect something good, that we tell ourselves it's time to change how we think and what we think about, and probably what we say, and especially what we do. Because if our hope and our belief and our expectation is that something great is going to happen in spite of bad circumstances, your life will begin to look and feel and be very, very different. So let's look at this in Scripture. We're going to take a story each week, and we're going to look at characters who were in a hopeless situation and what it meant for them and what they did in order to achieve hope. So let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 30. Now, this is the story of David, and about 14, 15 chapters ago, David was anointed king of Israel. So the prophet Samuel, God told him, hey, go grab David, the youngest son of Jesse, and take him and anoint him king. He's my guy. I want him to be king over my chosen people. And so, cool. Samuel goes, okay, you're anointed king. Now God's going to set you over the nation of Israel so that you can be king of Israel and Judah. And you'd think that would be like, cool, all right. I'm king. I'm just going to kind of put my feet up, relax, kind of just like eat grapes and have people fan me with those big leaves. Like, this sounds awesome. But instead what David got was years and years and years of running through the wilderness, avoiding a guy named Saul. Now, Saul was the present king of Israel. And believe it or not, when you're a king, you don't necessarily appreciate the fact that someone just goes and anoints some other guy to be king. And so Saul had a very simple solution for the David problem, and that was to chase him until he found him and then stab him with the sword and kill him. Now, David knew this, and so he was running through the wilderness for the last 14 or so chapters, trying to evade Saul. And it's interesting because when you read all this history, you see Saul being the bad guy and making horrible decisions, and you see David, the good guy, and he not only is running for his life when he's been rightfully crowned king, he's taking care not to hurt Saul. He had multiple occasions. Once Saul was relieving himself in a cave. David happened to be in said cave, and he had the opportunity to stab him in the back. There's literally not like a more opportune time when somebody is more vulnerable than when they are doing their business in a cave in the dark. I mean, it's like real easy to boom, you're dead. Like, wow, I'm king now. And David wouldn't do that because David had respect for the Lord's anointed. He had respect for who was the sitting king at the time. And so you see this story unfold and you think, man, David's doing everything right, and he still, like we're going to find out right here as we start to read, that he finds himself in a hopeless situation. And oftentimes that might be the case for you. It might not be something you brought on yourself. It might just be circumstances of life that have brought you a hopeless situation. And we always think, you know what, I am justified in being hopeless. But as we're going to find out, we never, ever are. Let's read chapter 30, starting in verse 1. It says, "Now when David and his men came to Ziklag," now Ziklag was the town they were staying in because they were evading Saul, on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire. Now David and his men were out, they were raiding, they were evading Saul, they were doing all sorts of stuff out in the woods. And while they were gone, the Amalekites come in and make this raid on Ziklag. So they burn it with fire, and they had taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. Now that's a pretty big deal. Obviously, it's a horrible thing if the women and children are carried off or they're just killed on the spot. But when they're carried off and they're alive, the question becomes, what the heck are the Amalekites doing with them or doing to them? So this is a big deal. They killed no one, they carried them off, went their way, and when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. Now, this was not like a soft bunch of people. These are not like effeminate, metro kind of dudes. These are the guys who are out raiding. These are guys who are warriors. They're out like taking care of business. And they come back and they already are in a pretty hopeless situation. Then they find their wives and sons and all of their stuff taken away and their town burned to the ground. And they raised up their voice, including David, these tough guys, and not only did they cry, they wept. And not only did they weep, they wept until they had no more strength to weep. And not everybody has experienced this. I do know that there are plenty of you who have. You've gone through things. You have experienced life in such a way that you have literally cried and wept until you had no more strength. It's things happen, things come up and arise, situations happen in our lives, and they can be of a nature and to the degree they are so severe that they absolutely, totally wreck you. And these guys are wrecked, and you think, man, this went from bad to worse. Now listen here, it gets even worse. Let's read on, starting in verse 5. It says, David's 2 wives had also been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. Now listen to this. And David was greatly distressed. That seems like an understatement. He was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and his daughters. So it went from bad to worse to even worse. Now, not only is his city burned down and all of his relatives are taken away, now the people who would be his friends, the people who would be his protectors, his ragtag army that he had with him, now even they want to chuck rocks at David until he dies. They're saying, this is your fault. You led us into this. Now, what does David have left? Right? He's not functioning king of Israel yet. He's being chased through the wilderness by Saul. His wives and sons and daughters have been taken away, and now all of his friends want to kill him. Now, I've gone through rough stuff. I know that any of you watching this have gone through rough stuff, but can we just admit that none of us have probably gone through anything quite that bad? That this, if we went through this, this would seem so much more hopeless than any hopeless situation that we've ever gone through in our lives. But listen to what David did. It's the same sentence, the same verse. After he finds out they're bitter in soul, their sons and daughters have been taken away, it says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. David strengthened himself. David encouraged. This word translates as getting strength or getting encouragement, laying hold, almost even as conquering yourself. Because you could be in a hopeless situation, but David chose at this juncture, what I'm going to do is take the responsibility upon myself to strengthen myself. What David did was he got his hopes up. Now, that is a dire circumstance. You've probably not been through that. I haven't been through that. I hope that I never do go through that. But what I think that we need to take away from this is something that will be very offensive to you. And it's very offensive to me. It's this: the burden of hope, the responsibility of strengthening ourselves, of getting our hopes up and setting our expectations high is not, it's not placed on our family, it's not placed on our friends. That burden is not placed on God, it's not placed on the world. It's our job. It is solely our responsibility to get our hopes up and to strengthen ourselves in the Lord our God. It's our job. Now, how did David do it? I'm glad you asked. Let's go on. In verse 7 it says, and David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. Now, an ephod, or ephod, it was a garment that was worn by the priests when they would go in to minister in the temple before the Lord, or in the tabernacle in the temple before the Lord. The priest would wear a certain type of clothing. And David, there's not a ton known about this. There's not a bunch of scriptural evidence about what exactly the ephod did. It's sort of mysterious in Scripture, but we do know this. We do know that the way that David strengthened himself is he put himself in a position. He put himself in the right clothing. He put himself before the priest. He put himself in whatever possible avenue or means he had of getting God's advice, of contacting his Lord. That's what he knew he had to do. And I'd suggest that's exactly what we need to do when it comes to strengthening ourselves in the Lord. He said, I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what I have to do. I don't care who I have to talk to. I have to have God's mind on this matter. So he puts this ephod on, and it says in verse 8, and David inquired, he asked of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band, meaning the raiders who came and took the women and children? Shall I overtake them? He, the Lord, said, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besser, where those who were left behind stayed. So David, this is important, and I think this is oftentimes where we miss it. This is where we kind of veer. We get to a place that seems bad, and we, without even thinking about it, we just go, you know what? Things are bad. They're probably getting worse. I'm throwing in the towel. And it's someone else's job to cheer me up. God, where are you? You're supposed to make things all better and make things all work out, and then I'll be happy again. That's not what David did. David got before the Lord and he said, God, what do I do? He didn't say, will you make me feel better? He didn't say, will you make my friends be less mean to me? Will you please make my friends want to throw less stones at me, or lighter stones, or softer stones? He said, God, what do I do? And this is, I'm telling you, this is going against modern psychiatric wisdom and all of that kind of self-esteem, like pull yourself up by your bootstrap, like say nice things about yourself and get self-help and all this kind of stuff. What David's solution is he said, God, what do I go and do regardless of how I feel about it? And I think that that's a big answer to a lot of our problems, is that it's really not so much how we feel about a situation. The question is, what do I do? God, what do you have for me to do? Whatever you say, that's what I'm going to do. If you say don't pursue this band of bad guys, I won't. If you say to pursue them, I will. And even though I'm tired, because as you're going to see, these guys were going through the wilderness, they could barely walk anymore. They were carrying gear. They had been like just motoring for a long time. Some of them couldn't even make it. Some of them, they just camped and they just stayed where they were, and they like, okay, you know what? They've got my sons and daughters and my wife, but I can't go any farther. They were literally out of steam. They were out of energy. And even in those circumstances where they were tired, they were sad, they were mad, they were all of these things during this hopeless situation, the answer was still, God, what do I do? And God wasn't like, why don't you just chill out for a while? Why don't you, read some books, do a little bit of self-care? He was like, get up and go jack some fools. And that's what they did. So we'll skip down to verse 16. And when they had been taken down to where this army was encamped, it says, behold, the Amalekites, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down like a total boss from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped except 400 young men who jumped on their camels and fled. They took off at the first sign of trouble. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all of it. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. That's the happy ending. That's what happened. But it never would have happened if David would not have got before God in the worst part of the story, in the most hopeless part of the story, the dark night of the soul. I mean, you're talking bitter souls, weeping until you have no strength. Your family's gone. Your goods are gone. Your men hate you. Literally, there is nothing good going on in his life. It is as hopeless as it can get. And still, he did what was right. And because he did what was right, because he got his hopes up, because he set his expectations on something other than his circumstances, other than himself, other than his friends, he was able to go and recapture all that God had for him to do. Was it difficult? Heck, yes. Did it require sacrifice? Yes. Did he have to do something that he probably didn't want to do? Yes. But guess what? That doesn't matter. It didn't matter for him. It doesn't matter for me. And it doesn't matter for you. What matters is that when we find ourselves in a hopeless situation, we're brave enough to say, you know what? Everything around me is dark. Everything around me seems like it's falling apart. But I am going to deliberately choose to set my expectations on something good. I am not going to say, this marriage is falling apart, it's getting worse, and it's going to fail. I'm not going to say that my kids have been wandering and they went off the rails and they're probably just going to go their way forever and it's going to end up in heartache and wreckage. I'm not going to say, oh no, I guarantee my business is going to shut down, we can't get there from here. No, the statements and the testimony of my mouth, what my expectations are going to say they're going to be a reflection of my heart. They're going to be a reflection of my hope in God. I am going to say, even if I don't feel, even if I don't see, even if I don't think that it's going to happen this way or think that things are good, I'm still going to choose. You know what? I'm going to ask my God, God, what do I do? God, how do you see this marriage? God, how do you see these kids? God, how do you see my future? How do you see my career? How do you see this stuff? And I'm going to purposely set my hopes on that. I'm going to dare. I'm going to take the courage to expect that something amazing is going to happen. I might have to change. I might have to sacrifice. I might have to change some things up and change what I talk about and change what I think about and change who I hang around. If my friends want to throw rocks at me till I die, I'm definitely going to change who I hang around. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is that the responsibility for setting our hopes, setting our expectations, changing our future, it starts with us. And God is there to say, hey, I know exactly what you need to do, and it's this. Take courage and do this. Be strong and do this. And if that's you and you say, you know what, I've been a negative Nancy. I've spoken death over my life. I've spoken failure over my kids and over my marriage and over my job and my future and all this. And without knowing it, I can't remember the last time I said something good because I can't remember the last time I believed something good about who I am and where I'm going. And if that's you, I'd invite you to pray this prayer with me. Dear Jesus, I strengthen myself in you. You see what's good, and you're always going somewhere good. And Jesus, I want to follow you. I want to live a life of faith, of expectation, of high hopes. Jesus, save me. Cleanse me. Wash me by your blood that you shed on the cross. And make me part of your family. In Jesus' name, amen.